Hello, everyone at Chitkara University. Can you see us? Can you hear us? Ready to start? Welcome, dear colleagues, everyone who's joining us today. Our colleague Udit is there on site, I believe.
Everything seems to be working well, Scott. Udit's just confirmed that we're live and people can see us and hear us. So that's fantastic.
Fantastic. Well, shall we start, Dr. Dyke?
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And yeah, we're going to talk for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, have a short break in case you have any questions as we move through the first part of our presentation, and then talk again for about another 15, 20 minutes in order that we get this event inside of 45 minutes. And we understand that you'll be closing the university, locking the doors at 4 o'clock. So thank you very much for the opportunity to do this. And yes, please, any questions or any comments or any feedback can be passed directly to our colleague Udit Tomar, who's there on site at Chitkara University. Scott, are we ready to kick off? I think so, right? Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name's Gareth. My dear colleague Scott is also here. We are presenting training events, webinar events for Bentham Science. SCI-journal is the name of the organization that we have together, which provides training like this event, effective English writing for SCI-journal article acceptance. If you are interested in getting access to a three-month journal trial, if that's something that's of interest to you or your university, do scan the QR code that you can see on the screen in front of you. This will enable you access to all of the Bentham journals, 40 or more impact factor journals, enabling you to empower your researchers with a wealth of knowledge. Right, Scott? Bentham journals are absolutely fantastic, aren't they?
Fantastic, high-quality journals, many with strong impact factors and very robust peer review systems in place as well. So excellent journals.
So that's our starting point. Have a look at that QR code, give it a scan, jump in, because what we're talking about today is communication skills in English academic writing, because we've all of us often been the recipients of letters like this. Dear sir, dear madam, many thanks for asking whether we would like to publish your paper. It's good and original, but we are unfortunately not willing to publish it. One of the main reasons around the world why academic articles get rejected by international journals is because of English, problems in the English writing. We've collected a list from other publishers, including Bentham, for the reasons for rejection here on this slide. You can see that poor English writing is up there. So one of the things that we are here to help with, Scott and I at SCI-journal, working with Bentham Science publishers, is to help researchers around the world get their English up to scratch so that they can get their papers more effectively published and accepted in those leading international journals. Scott's in Japan. He knows all about this from his perspective working over there.
Definitely. And this is an issue that we see in native English speakers and non-native English speakers. Some of the most troublesome manuscripts that I've worked on the author services side, supporting authors, have been written by native speakers. So it's not necessarily just an issue for non-natives. Even native speakers struggle to make their science communication clear and impactful. So that's why we're here today, to help strengthen your science communications.
We collected a few examples of funny uses of English on this slide. And the point is that it's important to make sure that your message gets across clearly, precisely, and that there's no confusion in what you're writing. Because if you submit a paper to an international journal and there are issues with the English, for sure, those will be picked up in the peer review process. And that will lead to a lower chance of your paper getting eventually accepted. So our starting point is that academic articles, academic research papers often need to be very well written, perhaps even to a higher standard of English than you might see in other forms of writing. So you've got to be clear, you've got to be succinct, you've got to get your message across. And so in this short training presentation, we will provide you with some easy to implement steps and tricks that you can put into your own writing, because writing should be fun. It should be beneficial as an intellectual activity in its own right. And I usually share some stories from my own personal experience at this point. Some of my heroes in English language writing: Winston Churchill, we've all heard of him, and some journalists from England, where I'm from, who taught me that the best way to write is exactly the way that you think. Hadley is a journalist working for an English newspaper. A. Gill, unfortunately not with us anymore, but also a very successful, very easy to read, very funny travel and food journalist. But he was so dyslexic that he wasn't able to actually write anything really for himself. Everything that he wrote and published was spoken into a dictaphone, into a computer, and then transcribed. So think about your writing in English as you put your research together. Churchill, of course, was famous for the way that he was able to use language to inspire people and get people thinking along the same lines as him. So as you write in English, think about how you begin that process. How do you feel about writing in English? How do you start? Because you should be like Arnold in the middle of this slide. You need to be a bricklayer with your English writing. You need a plan before you start the writing process. What kind of writer are you? So 2 messages so far. Think in English when you come to communicate your research, and make a plan before you begin. Be like Arnold, be a bricklayer. Don't make the mistakes that so many people make when they put English language papers together. So, tips from us: think in English and work with papers that you like and respect in your field. And we're launching a poll to get you involved. Have a think about this. Which section of your manuscript should you write first? Scott?
This is the question that we're often asked. So we've got 4 choices. So everyone joining us today, we'll give you 4 selections. Which section would you normally write first if you were writing a research manuscript? Introduction? Hands up in the room. Who would write the introduction first? Or maybe your abstract?
We're going to ask
Okay.
Udit to give us some feedback on this, because
please, Udit, let us know how people are voting. How about option 2? Would you write the methods first? Hands up in the room. Who would write the methods first if you're writing your research paper? Hands up. Third choice, the results. Would you start writing the results section of your paper first before writing anything else? Hands up in the room for the results section first. Okay, and fourth and final choice, would you start writing the discussion and conclusion first when writing your research paper? Who would vote for that? Okay, let's ask our expert, Dr. Dyke, where would you start if you were writing a research paper today?
Well, we've got no feedback yet from our friend Udit in the audience, but personally speaking, I would definitely start my paper with the results section, or potentially the methods section. But usually for me, the results would be the bit that I would start working on first of all. I've done the analysis, I've collected the data, I've probably made some figures or some tables, so I'm going to write about those first. What about you, Scott?
Great. Well, that's one of the 2 best options, results or methods. It is possible to start writing your paper while you're still pulling in your results. You can actually draft that section of your paper, because your methods are your methods and results will come a bit later. So you can actually kick off the outline of your paper even after you've formed your methods, your methodologies. So results or methods first, either is recommended, definitely. What many people do is try to start from the top of the manuscript. They're thinking that they write the paper in the same order as you would read the paper, but that's actually not the best way to write a paper. So think back to Gareth's slide from a minute ago about the bricklayer. The bricklayer needs to start with the foundations, and your methods and results are the foundation of your research. So you start there and you build your way up from there. So try to avoid writing from the top down as you write your manuscript paper. Think like a bricklayer, start with the foundations and build up. So that means methods and results and build up from there. Great, thanks for answering our poll.
I think that's an issue that many early career researchers face in particular. Like if you're starting to work on one of your first papers, or you're getting going with one of the early papers, a big mistake that people make often, as Scott just mentioned, is just to sit down with a blank piece of paper with the computer screen open, write down the title and try to start to write the paper from beginning to end. And that is not the best way to go about putting an article together, but it might seem the most logical way at the outset. So very important for us to make that point. So in terms of English language writing, here are some basic features of good plain English. Short sentences, no unnecessary words, using familiar words in your writing, and that's important so that as many people as possible can access your research, and as many people as possible will be able to read your research, and that will help you to get your papers published in broad scope journals, which of course are the kinds of journals with the higher impact factors. Active voice rather than passive voice in your writing. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'm sure that lots of people will have questions about that, but a clear style and good punctuation. So try to apply these guidelines, these features of English in your academic writing, and basics of plain English, because lots of people think, and we do workshops with researchers all over the world all of the time, lots of people think that the more complicated you are in your writing, the better in your academic writing. They tend to think, if I use long words, complicated sentences, that's going to make me look better. That's going to make my writing appear more impressive. And that really is not the case in English. One complex idea per sentence, short sentences, keep the verb and the subject together, an active voice if you can in your writing. So we concluded, our team did this, I did this, rather than the third person, rather than passive voice. Takes more words and it's often harder to understand. Cut out those unnecessary adjectives, avoiding jargon, short and simple words, and no double negatives. But above all, keep it simple. Why is that? Well, actually, most of the people who are going to be reading your published research work are themselves not native English speakers. If you think about where most of the research is being done around the world these days, China, Japan, places where English is not a native language, that's where most of your research is going to get read. And people do tend to make a number of mistakes in their English writing. So what we've done in this presentation is we've put together a list of the most common English writing mistakes, and we're going to talk a little bit about them so that you know about them and can avoid them in your own work. We call this standing on the shoulders of giants, the people who've come before you. If you know about the most common mistakes that people tend to make in their writing, you can avoid those mistakes yourself. So here they are: plagiarism, tenses and switches, spelling conventions, and inappropriate word use and confusion about word use. So just quickly, plagiarism. Of course, we're all aware of what this is. It's where you take something that's not your own work and you cite it or pass it off as your own work. And of course, this is not allowed. There's lots of software packages that journals and publishers use to catch this kind of thing, but it's important to be aware of plagiarism. And so at this point, we're just going to pause for a moment, and Scott's going to ask you a few questions about plagiarism. Scott.
Thanks, Dr. Dyke. So let's poll our guests today. As you're pulling together your manuscript, you should always be keeping in the back of your mind the ethics of writing your paper. So here are 4 options. I'm going to ask our group today, raise your hand if any of these you believe to be plagiarism. So there may be several correct answers here. So let's try them all together. Raise your hand if you think A is plagiarism, reading of the works of others to gather information. Hands up if you think that is plagiarism. How about option B, using the work of another and calling it your own? Would that be plagiarism? Hands up in the room. Okay. Option C, citing the works of others to support your argument. Would that mean plagiarism if you include that in your paper? Hands up in the room. Who thinks that's plagiarism? Option C. Okay, great. And finally, option D. Do you think this is plagiarism? Examining the works of others to shape your argument. Anyone who thinks that is plagiarism, hands up high, don't be shy. Hands up high, don't be shy. Okay, well, which of these would you consider to be plagiarism, Dr. Dyke? Any of them? All of them? Which of these are plagiarism?
I think it's a bit confusing, isn't it, really? Because lots of people will definitely go for option B, I would say, because using the work of others and saying that it's your own is, of course, very naughty. That's plagiarism. That's not something that you should be doing. So that's definitely one of the correct answers. But which others are also plagiarism in this list?
Well, the answer is only B is plagiarism, assuming that, for example, A, of course, we read others' works. That's part of analyzing the literature and finding gaps and gathering information. So that's okay. C is okay if you're citing correctly in your paper. So that's the key. Citing others is fine if it's done correctly. Right? We all do that. We draw, as you say, Dr. Dyke, we stand on the shoulders of others in our research. So citing others to support our argument is okay, if correctly and ethically cited. So that's fine. And D, examining others, that's part of the discussion and conclusion portion of your paper, isn't it? Looking at how your paper fits into the greater context of the literature. So A, C, and D are all fine if done correctly, ethically, and properly cited. In this case, B is the one that very clearly is plagiarism. Great. Kudos to anyone who answered B. Yay.
Yeah, Udit wrote me in the chat and confirmed that that is the winning answer from our friends in the audience today. So that's great. Nice one, everybody. Something else we need to talk about, though, is this issue, and this is self-plagiarism, because lots of researchers, myself included, when I was working full-time as a researcher, are unaware that you can't steal from yourself. If you're reusing something from your own published work, a map, a figure, even some data, you must cite yourself. And this is very, very important because this happens often in academic publishing because researchers are unaware that they have to do this. So they think, people tend to think, I made that map, I made that figure, it's mine, I can reuse it again in any of my subsequent published work. Actually, not. You've got to cite the first place that you use a figure, a map, anything in your own published work, subsequently in your later publication. So self-plagiarism is an issue. Moving on to our second common mistake, this is the use of tenses in different sections of academic writing. And this is important because people often make this way, way, way too complicated in terms of which tense to use in the different sections, remember one of the messages of this presentation is that you should keep your writing simple, keep your writing concise, keep it simple. So try to use the present tense as much as possible in your paper. As you can see here in the introduction, in the results, and in the discussion, the present tense is best if possible for accepted facts. Of course, in your methods, as we mentioned earlier, perhaps one of the earliest parts, perhaps the first part of an academic paper that you might write, this bit will be written in the past, but try to keep these different sections as simple as possible in terms of which tenses to use. Now, I'm British, as you can hear from my accent. Scott, my friend and colleague, he's from North America. So there are different spelling conventions between the different kinds of English that we use, right, Scott?
Definitely, and people often ask which is most accepted. Well, that's a great question. It really depends, of course, on the journal. And some journals will say that they accept either, but the key is just to be consistent. So what we often see is authors mixing British and American English. So whichever you choose, make sure first that it's acceptable to the journal and that you use that consistently. So I often recommend authors to choose one or the other. I have a colleague who's British, but published to so many journals that preferred American English that he just taught himself to always use American English, even though he himself is British, because it was just easier for him to get into that mode and stay consistent with American English. So find what works for you, but be consistent.
You can look at your journal aims and scope, the instructions for authors, because they will say if they have a particular preferred style. We recommend that authors use British English or American English, or they may very well not care so long as you're consistent, as Scott just said. So make sure you set your spell checker. One of the most annoying things as an editor is seeing those variations in spelling within the same document, and that immediately flags to an editor that there's potentially a wider problem with the English. And many of the differences are, aside from spelling, you can see some common examples here on this slide, even in the use of tenses, with American English, AE, British English on this slide, and some not obvious spelling differences, like my favorite, the color gray, spelt quite differently in American English and British English. So do keep that in mind. It's a common mistake, so it's well worth being aware of. Also, emotional words. Overuse of superlatives in academic writing is definitely to be avoided. A fantastic discovery, a marvelous result, an absolutely fabulous outcome, earth-shattering, magnificent. Words like this, superlatives, are not in the right place in academic writing. So keep that in mind as well. I edited a paper last week, came from China. The title, the fantastic potential of land use change in China. It immediately gives the editor the feeling of informality with the article, and that's something that you also want to avoid. Striking the balance between formal language yet simple language is very important in your writing. And don't forget that in English we have adjectives that are absolute and so often can't be modified. Something is either unique or it's not. A petri dish is either sterile or it's not. Okay, although there are some exceptions like pregnancy, which has to be qualified. So somebody can be recently pregnant, but they can't be slightly pregnant. Of course, again, they're either pregnant or they're not. So keep that in mind as well. The way that you use words in your English writing is absolutely critical. And you can have a look at these sentences as well. See what you can see in terms of the humorous use of English language in these three sentences. We're giving our audience a few examples here, Scott. So what's wrong with these sentences? See if you can spot.
These are some of my favorite examples. Who can spot what's wrong with sentence number 1 here? Well, the question is, this sentence is a bit unclear about who's actually using the multiple regression techniques. Was it the animals? Obviously not. The animals are being experimented on, so it's unclear from the sentence who's actually doing the action. How about sentence number 2? In assessing the damage, the plants exhibited numerous lesions. Again, it's a bit of a dangling modifier here. Who's actually doing the assessment? The plants? No, of course not. The plants are exhibiting the lesions. So again, the sentence is a bit clear on who's the actor and who's being experimented on or who's being studied. Example 3, the spiders were inadvertently discovered while repairing a faulty growth chamber. Well, very talented spiders. Again, it's a bit unclear who's the actor and who's being acted upon. So this is something we often see in manuscripts. So just be careful. Make sure that your sentences are simple. A great way to avoid these issues is, as Gareth was saying earlier, keep your subjects and verb close together and close to the beginning of the sentence. Don't try to get too fancy with your sentences. Remember again that most of your readers are not native English speakers. So keep sentences short, simple, subjects and verbs close together and close to the beginning of the sentence, and you can avoid some of these kinds of funny mistakes in your writing.
And don't forget to proofread, because of course the best way to catch these kinds of mistakes is to read out your work aloud. Read it out to the mirror, read it out to the cat, the dog, your kids, so that you catch these issues in the English writing, so that you're able to avoid these often quite humorous but nevertheless problematic uses of words, so that it's clear to your editor, it's clear to your peer reviewers what you are talking about. And here are some examples of unnecessary words which make your language sound sloppy. Be that as it may, however, nevertheless, indeed, meanwhile, at the same time. Very important to cut these out of your writing. It has long been known that probably means that somebody's not bothered to look up the answer. Correct to an order of magnitude is indicating that the answer is not in fact correct. Almost reached significance at the 5% level. That implies a selective interpretation of results. Your text will be easier to understand if you use simple words and phrases to replace more complex or foreign ones. So similar rather than analogous, utilize rather than use, end rather than terminate. Keep your writing simple. So another very common issue that we see often in writing in English is confusion over the use of the words that and which. These words, of course, help us to make meanings and relationships clear, but there are some examples here on this slide around the correct use of these phrases. There's a break in the clause, so the lawnmower which is broken is in the garage. The lawnmower that is broken is in the garage, semicolon, so is the lawnmower that works. So different uses of these words and phrases in your sentences will help to make your meaning clear, right, Scott?
Absolutely. I always tell authors that if you're going to use comma which as a modifier, ask yourself, can you separate that into 2 sentences, yes or no? Those 2 sentences would be, the lawnmower is broken. It is in the garage. A very short, concise sentences, which is also perfectly fine. We recommend that you use short sentences as much as possible. If you want to get fancy and use comma which, make sure that you could split that into 2 sentences and that the meaning would be clear. Question from our guests. Udit says, our guests are asking if paraphrasing is a good way to avoid plagiarism. Well, this is a fantastic question. Gareth, I think you've got first take on this one. I have my own answer for this, but please, how would we answer this for our guests today? If paraphrasing is a good way to avoid plagiarism.
It is, absolutely. And it's really important to teach yourself how to paraphrase effectively. And that's not something that we'll talk about in this event, but it is something that we would be delighted to come back and talk about in another event in the future. Paraphrasing is very important. Of course, you're taking information from Scott's paper and you're rewriting it in your paper, but you must cite. And that's the best way to avoid plagiarism. Even if I'm paraphrasing from one of Scott's publications, rewriting to put it into my paper, the idea is still coming from Scott's paper. So I must cite that earlier piece of work.
Great. And also, I think the greater question here, or related question, excuse me, is do we want to use direct quotes or indirect quotes? And either way, please heed Dr. Dyke's words. It must be cited in the paper. You must cite all your references, whether you paraphrase or not. So if you quote Dr. Dyke's paper and you don't put it in direct quotes and you paraphrase what he said, it still has to be cited correctly. So whether you use direct quotes or you paraphrase it, please remember to cite.
Absolutely, absolutely. The overuse of direct quotes in academic writing can be an issue because it makes the paper difficult to read. If I'm putting lots of quotes from other people's papers into my paper, it just makes it harder to read. So better to paraphrase, as we've discussed, and cite. So McCleary 2023 said X, Y, and Z. Then I don't need to put that into direct quotes. Moving on quickly to some other common mistakes that we see in academic writing. This one is the use of redundant words. So some examples, I don't need to say this box is small in size. I can just say this box is small. This box is rectangular in shape. You can see the redundancy in the writing. That man is blue in color. Again, it's redundant. And your argument is tenuous in nature. It's not necessary to have those extra words in your sentences. Again, proofreading, checking your work to make sure that these areas of confusion don't occur in your writing is very important, because what you want to do with your writing is signal a clear question. Keep a consistent order, as we've discussed, which bits of your paper to write first, repeating your key messages, keeping a consistent point of view in your writing. That's obvious, really, because if you keep saying things differently, you're going to confuse your readers. Putting those parallel ideas in parallel form. A good example of this is the method section, which then repeats information in the results. You talk about what you've done in your study, and then you talk about what the results are from the method. So those two sections of academic writing are often written in a parallel form. Have a look at some papers in your research area. You'll very, very often see that even the subheadings in the method section and in the results section are the same or very similar. And we talk about topic sentences in one of our other presentations, but these are also clear and important ways to get your message across. If you know your research question, you can set up an expectation for the rest of the paper. This article talks about this, and now I'm going to answer that question in the rest of the article. So explicit phrases, question words, stating those hypotheses and what effects are of your hypothesized effects. And don't forget to identify variables and study design. This slide has quite a lot of text on it, but it's important. Take a screenshot, or we'll give you a copy of this presentation through Udit, of course, at the end. You don't want contractions in your academic writing. Big mistake that people very often make is the word data. That's a plural word. So data were collected rather than data was collected. That's something that we see all the time in editing. Direct quotations, as we talked about. Paraphrasing is better than putting lots of direct quotes into your academic writing. And check your references. Make sure you've actually read all of the references in your academic article and review what you put into your paper by proofreading and so on. We've put together a list of commonly confused words on this slide, and these are worth looking at because people often get these words confused. There are some very similar spellings of some words that mean quite different things in English, and that takes us also back to the point that we made about not mixing up American versus English background. And I'm not going to read out all of this information, of course, but we'll give you this presentation so you can have a look through some rules for the use of pronouns. the correct spellings, including the use of plurals in English, the use of abstract words. Be careful with that present participle, what you're going to be doing in different parts of your academic article, how to use punctuation, colons versus semicolons, and what to do with commas. As I already mentioned, we'll give you a copy of these slides of this presentation so that you can use all of the information on these slides in your later work. And don't worry, we can come back online anytime you like to do more of these kinds of presentations, because Bentham Science, SciTrain, Gareth, Scott, and Udit, we are always available to help you with your writing and help you be the best that you can be with your English academic communication. Don't forget, it's important. And these are jokes, by the way, so don't copy these down and use them in your own writing, but be more or less specific. Avoid cliches like the plague, because they're old hat. Verbs has to agree with their subjects. Prepositions are not words to end sentences with. And don't start your sentences with conjunctions. Is it ever wrong to split an infinitive? Parenthetical remarks, however relevant, are usually unnecessary. No sentence fragments. Contractions aren't good style. Do not be redundant. Do not use more words than necessary. One should never generalize. Eliminate one-word sentences and eliminate commas that are not necessary. And probably most importantly of all, you never need to use a big word when a diminutive one will suffice. Keep your English writing simple and effective, and proofread, proofread, proofread. Right, Scott? What do you think? How are we doing?
Yeah, these are great. These are some of my favorite editor jokes. I love these.
Well, I think at that point, everybody, because we're aware that we need to keep this webinar on the short side today, and we do want to leave a few moments for questions and comments. Let's throw the floor open. If you have a question, maybe we can pass it through Udit so that we can try to answer it in our event today. I'll show you this QR code again in case you haven't had the chance to scan it at the beginning of the session. It gives you access to all of our Bentham content through your institution, of course. Don't worry, you can expand your library's collection. And we've talked about English communication and writing skills and some common mistakes and how to avoid them in our presentation today. So hopefully it was useful, and we'd be delighted to come back, wouldn't we, Scott? Like, we love appearing out of the online ether at universities around the world talking about writing and communication skills.
We do. Let's see if our colleague Udit has any questions from our guests today. Any burning questions from the group today? Udit, feel free to stick them in the chat box and we'll answer them the best that we can. Oh, okay. Udit says he's going to take questions from our guests today and forward them to us. Got it. Okay, understood.
So we can answer through Udit and send follow-up materials, maybe some videos that we have, some other content that we have. And we'll also provide a copy of the slides that we used today to Udit. We'll bung those in WhatsApp just now so he can share those with everybody who's been good enough to listen to the presentation today. Thank you very much. So I think we should end the session, and we can talk like through Udit if there's any follow-up. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.